She was forced to marry her sister's millionaire fiancé, but on wedding night, his secret emerged. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The church bells tolled like heavy footsteps chasing her down. Inside the grand cathedral, the scent of lilies and polished wood filled the air. Yet for her it smelled only of suffocation. Rows of glittering guests turned their heads, diamonds catching the light as though mocking the trembling young woman who dared to walk down the aisle in a gown that was not meant for her. She was not supposed to be here. She was not supposed to wear this white silk gown, not supposed to carry the bouquet that was chosen for another. Her sister had fled on the morning of the wedding, leaving chaos in her wake. And when the family realized the disgrace they would suffer, all eyes turned to the younger daughter. "You will take her place," her mother had whispered harshly, pressing the veil into her hands. "Do you want to see this family ruined? Do you want to watch your father collapse under the shame?" She wanted to scream that she was not her sister, that she had dreams of her own, simple dreams drawn in the pages of her old sketchbook. But the pressure was unbearable. The threat of losing the roof above their heads, the fear of creditors knocking at their door. She had no choice. Now she stood at the altar, heart pounding so loud she feared it would echo in the microphone. And beside her was the man everyone had called the perfect fiancé, tall, commanding, his tailored suit fitting like armor, his eyes as cold as cut glass. The millionaire heir who had once been promised to her sister now glanced down at her with unreadable detachment. The officiant's words echoed, but she heard none of them. All she felt was the weight of the ring in his palm when he took her hand. He did not smile. He did not soften. He slid the ring onto her finger like a businessman signing a contract, efficient and devoid of warmth. And yet the crowd erupted in applause, as if love had triumphed. Cameras flashed, immortalizing the lie. When they left the cathedral, he offered his arm, stiff and formal, as if she were merely an accessory to his reputation. "Remember," he murmured without turning his head, "this marriage is for appearances only. You do not owe me affection, and I will not ask for any. We keep the families quiet, and in a year we can go our separate ways." His words cut sharper than any blade. She forced a nod, her throat too tight to reply. That night, in the limousine that carried them to his mansion, silence thickened like a storm cloud. She clutched her sketchbook in her lap, the only thing she had dared to bring with her from the small room she once called home. She opened it slightly, glancing at the charcoal drawings inside, the fragile evidence of a life that felt like it was slipping away. He noticed. His gaze flicked to the worn pages, but he said nothing, only adjusted his cufflinks as though distance were a shield. The mansion loomed like a fortress as they arrived, towering gates swallowing her whole. Every chandelier sparkled with cold magnificence. Every polished marble floor reflected a life she did not belong to. And yet, as she followed him inside, one truth rang louder than the chimes of the cathedral bells. This was not love. This was a contract. But contracts can break. Secrets can surface. And sometimes, even in the coldest of arrangements, hearts can betray the rules they swore to follow. The limousine doors closed behind her with a soft thud that sounded more final than the vows she had spoken hours earlier. The mansion swallowed her whole, its ceilings impossibly high, its chandeliers dripping with light that felt colder than ice. Staff members lined the hallway, bowing politely before disappearing, as if they too understood this was not a celebration but a performance staged for the world to see. He walked ahead of her, his steps echoing against marble floors, his posture straight and unyielding. She followed with her sketchbook clutched against her chest, her heels clicking like timid heartbeats in the cavernous silence. Finally, he stopped in a study lined with leather-bound books and dark wood, the kind of room built not for comfort but for intimidation. He turned to face her, removing the cufflinks from his wrists with a calmness that felt rehearsed. "Let us make this clear," he said, his tone clipped, his eyes never softening. "This marriage is nothing more than a contract. I will not ask you for love. nor should you expect it from me. You will appear by my side when duty demands, and you will maintain the illusion of a faithful wife. Outside those requirements, your life remains your own." The words landed heavy, yet she nodded slowly. She had expected cruelty, but what startled her was the sheer indifference. He crossed to the desk and opened a folder, sliding a stack of papers toward her. "Read these and sign them. They outline the terms. You will receive financial security for your family. In return, you will not interfere in my personal affairs. After 1 year, we may dissolve this union quietly." Her trembling hands unfolded the pages. The clauses were sharp as blades, rules dictating behavior, appearances, silence. It was not a marriage, it was a merger. Still, she picked up the pen, her vision blurring as she wrote her name on the line. Every stroke felt like erasing a piece of herself. When she set the pen down, he spoke again. "Do not misunderstand. I did not want this either. Your sister's absence forced my hand, and I will not allow scandal to destroy my company or my family's name. You are convenient, nothing more." Something inside her stung, yet pride lifted her chin. "You think I wanted this? You think I am grateful to be treated like a substitute? I was forced into this as much as you were." 2-1. For the first time, his eyes flickered something unreadable, gone in an instant. He turned away, walking toward the tall window where the city lights sprawled like jewels below. "Convenience can be useful," he said, his voice low, almost to himself. "Do not confuse that with value." Her throat tightened. She wanted to scream that she had value beyond any contract, that her worth could not be measured in signatures or appearances. But she swallowed the words, pressing her sketchbook closer against her heart. The evening stretched into silence. Servants delivered a meal neither of them touched. They sat at opposite ends of a long table, the distance between them heavier than the mansion's stone walls. When midnight approached, he rose from his chair. "The guest room down the hall is yours," he said without meeting her eyes. "We will maintain separate spaces. That will make this arrangement easier." "So?" She nodded, her voice locked away. As she walked toward the staircase, her gown brushing against the polished steps, she felt like a ghost drifting through a palace that would never be her home. Behind her, he remained in the study, the glow of the city reflected in his cold gaze. Their signatures were still wet on the contract. On paper, they were husband and wife. In truth, they were strangers bound by chains that looked like rings. And yet, somewhere deep inside, a spark of defiance stirred. If this was only a contract, then why did her heart beat faster every time his eyes lingered on her, even for a second too long? Morning sunlight streamed through tall windows, spilling gold across marble floors that still felt more like a museum than a home. She woke in the guest room, her sketchbook clutched to her chest as though it were armor against the coldness that surrounded her. The mansion was silent, its hallways echoing with the faint sound of her own footsteps when she ventured out. Every piece of furniture gleamed with wealth, but none carried warmth. At breakfast, the table stretched endlessly between them. He sat at one end, immaculately dressed, scanning through reports on his tablet. She sat at the other, staring down at silver cutlery too polished to touch. The food was exquisite, but it tasted of nothing. "Is this how it will be every day?" she finally asked, her voice hesitant yet steady. He did not look up. "This is not a home. It is a house that represents my name. Do not confuse the two." The words struck harder than he realized. She pushed her plate away, appetite gone, and excused herself. As she walked out, her sketchbook slipped slightly from her arm. He noticed. For a fleeting moment, his eyes lingered on the worn cover, curiosity flickering in the corners of his expression, but he said nothing. Later that morning, she wandered into the garden. Despite the trimmed hedges and manicured roses, it felt sterile, maintained by workers rather than touched by care. She found a quiet bench under a tree and opened her sketchbook. Charcoal lines bloomed on the page, shaping the memory of her old neighborhood, narrow streets, worn brick walls, and the market stalls that smelled of bread and spices. Her hand moved quickly, chasing fragments of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. She did not realize he had followed. His voice startled her. "You draw." She snapped the book shut and looked up. He stood a few feet away, his suit jacket off, his tie loosened. He seemed less untouchable in that moment, though his tone remained cool. "It is nothing," she said quickly. He tilted his head. "You guard it like it is everything." The silence between them stretched, filled only by the rustle of leaves. She finally whispered, "It is the only part of me I was allowed to bring here." Something flickered across his face, something human, before he masked it again. He turned as if to leave, but paused. "Do not let anyone see weakness. In this world, they will exploit it." She frowned, gripping her sketchbook tighter. "Kindness is not weakness." Their eyes met, sharp against soft, steel against fire. For a moment, the clash of their worlds was visible in the narrow space between them. Then he walked away without another word, leaving her heart pounding with a mix of defiance and confusion. That evening, a dinner with business associates pulled them both into the public eye. She wore a gown chosen by his staff, jewels that felt heavy on her neck. As cameras flashed and glasses clinked, she remembered his warning. Appearances mattered more than truth. He introduced her as his wife with a practiced smile, his hand resting lightly at her back as though the gesture were rehearsed. But when a guest mocked a young waiter for clumsiness, she acted on instinct, stepping forward to shield the boy. "He is only human. Everyone makes mistakes." Calm. The room fell silent for a beat. Then polite laughter smoothed over the moment, though she caught the sharp look in her husband's eyes. Not anger, but something else, something closer to surprise. On the ride home, he finally spoke. "You defied them. That was risky." She turned to the window, city lights streaking past. It was right. He studied her reflection in the glass. For the first time, his gaze did not carry disdain. Instead, it held something more complicated, as though the walls he had built so carefully had just cracked, if only by a single line. The days that followed unfolded like a quiet battle of wills inside the mansion. She moved through the gilded rooms like a shadow, filling blank pages in her sketchbook with memories, while he buried himself in board meetings, contracts, and late-night calls. Yet despite the distance they tried to maintain, their paths crossed in small, unplanned moments that neither could ignore. One evening, she found herself in the kitchen long after the staff had retired. She stood barefoot on the cold tile, boiling water for tea. The smell of chamomile drifted through the room when he entered unexpectedly, still in his suit, his shoulders tight with fatigue. "You make your own tea?" he asked, almost as though the idea startled him. She glanced up, defensive. "I do not need a staff member to pour hot water for me." For the first time, his lips curved faintly. Not quite a smile, but softer than the icy mask he usually wore. He accepted the cup she hesitantly offered, their fingers brushing for a brief second. The contact jolted her like static, too fleeting to name, yet impossible to forget. Later, she noticed other cracks in his armor. She caught him pausing in the hallway, watching her sketch in the garden, before pretending he had not seen. Once, she overheard him on the phone, his voice heavy with a rare weariness. And once, when she stumbled on the marble stairs, he reached out instinctively to steady her, his hand firm at her elbow before he quickly let go. The fog of indifference was shifting, even if he refused to admit it. A storm came one night, rain hammering against the tall windows. She was curled on the sofa in the grand sitting room, sketchbook on her lap, when the power flickered. The lights dimmed, shadows stretching across the ornate walls. He entered, a glass of scotch in his hand, his tie undone, his gaze drawn not to the storm, but to her. "You are not afraid?" he asked, settling into the chair opposite. She shook her head. "I grew up in a house with a leaky roof. Storms were loud but familiar. They never scared me." He studied her as though she were speaking a language he had forgotten. "You speak of it like it was home." "It was," she said softly. "Small, messy, but full of life." He sipped his drink, his eyes narrowing slightly, not in anger but in thought. "Home," he repeated, as if testing the weight of the word. The silence between them was not hostile that night. It was quieter, charged with something unnamed. The next day, she accompanied him to a formal dinner with investors. The ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers, and the air carried the smell of wealth and competition. She walked beside him, her gown flowing like liquid silk, her chin held high despite the whispers that trailed behind them. When a rival tried to corner him with a cutting remark, Questioning his decision-making, she stepped forward. If leadership were easy, everyone would succeed. But true leadership is measured not by ease, but by resilience. Her voice carried across the room, steady and clear. The investors nodded, some even applauded lightly. Her husband's eyes flicked to her, sharp with surprise but laced with something else: respect. On the way home, the limousine was silent until he spoke. "You should not have interfered." She turned to him, unflinching. "You should not underestimate me." His jaw tightened, but the corner of his mouth betrayed the faintest curve. He did not argue further. That night, when she returned to her room, she found a small surprise resting on her desk. A leather case, unopened, with her name embossed in gold. Inside were new sketching pencils and fine paper. Her hands trembled as she touched them, her heart pounding. He had noticed. He had chosen this for her. For the first time since the day she walked down the aisle in her sister's place, she felt the faintest thread pulling them closer, not through duty, not through contracts, but through something fragile and real. The gift of the sketching set lingered in her mind for days. Each time she opened the fine leather case and touched the pencils, her heart betrayed her, whispering questions she dared not voice. Was it kindness, or was it convenience? Was it a gesture of respect, or merely an attempt to keep her compliant in their arrangement? The lines between them blurred further when their worlds collided outside the mansion. He brought her to a charity gala, a dazzling affair held in a glass-domed hall, where the city lights shimmered above like fallen stars. She wore a gown of midnight blue chosen by his staff, but the poise she carried came from within. Cameras flashed as they entered arm in arm, the picture of a perfect couple. Throughout the evening, she observed him in his element, commanding, precise, admired by all. Yet she also noticed the stiffness in his shoulders, the way his jaw clenched when people praised his fortune but ignored his humanity. For the first time, she realized that his coldness was not only armor, it was also a cage. During the auction segment of the gala, an item came up that made her breath catch: a collection of rare sketchbooks donated to raise funds. Her eyes lingered on it, longing unhidden. Before she could blink, he raised his hand, outbidding every competitor without hesitation. The gavel fell, and the set was his. But when the prize was delivered, he placed it in her hands without ceremony. "Why would you do this?" she whispered, overwhelmed. His reply was simple, almost gruff. "Because you wanted it." The moment seared into her heart. Later that evening, a storm of gossip rippled through the hall when a rival business magnate made a snide comment about her origins. The words dripped with disdain, mocking her lack of pedigree. The air tightened, expectant, as though everyone anticipated her husband would dismiss her to avoid embarrassment. Instead, he did something no one expected. He slipped his arm around her shoulders and said firmly, "She has more grace and strength than anyone in this room. That is why she is my wife." The words struck her deeper than any contract ever could. For the first time, he defended her not out of obligation, but out of choice. The ballroom erupted in polite applause, but her heart was beating too loudly for her to hear it. On the drive home, silence stretched between them again, but it was no longer cold. She could still feel the warmth of his arm, the sincerity in his words. Finally, she spoke softly. "You did not have to say that." He glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "I did not say it for them. I said it for you." Her breath caught. She turned toward the window to hide the tears threatening to rise. But her reflection betrayed the truth. Something was changing, breaking through the icy boundaries they had both sworn to keep. The following days brought smaller, quieter moments that deepened the shift. He began joining her at breakfast, sometimes even setting aside his phone to ask about her drawings. She, in turn, accompanied him to meetings, surprising executives with her insight and steadiness. One evening, she found herself standing in the garden once more, sketchbook open, the new pencils gliding across the page. He appeared at her side, not to command or to criticize, but simply to watch. "What are you drawing?" he asked. She tilted the sketchbook toward him. It was not a landscape, nor a building, but a figure, his figure, standing tall beneath the storm, surrounded by fractured lines that somehow made him look human rather than untouchable. He stared at it longer than she expected, his throat working as though he wanted to speak but could not. Then, instead of words, he placed his jacket over her shoulders when the night air grew cold. The gesture was simple, But in that moment, she realized something undeniable. The man who had once slipped a ring on her finger like signing a contract was now slipping pieces of his heart into her hands, piece by piece, whether he admitted it or not. The night of their official wedding celebration arrived, an event postponed for weeks due to business obligations and carefully arranged schedules. It was not the quiet contract signing or the cold exchange of rings they had shared before. This was the grand affair the public expected, hosted inside his mansion with glittering chandeliers, orchestral music, and a guest list filled with every powerful name in the city. She stood at the top of the staircase in an ivory gown chosen for her, a diamond necklace resting against her collarbone. Cameras clicked as guests admired her, whispering about her beauty, her elegance, and her supposed fortune to have married him. Inside, her stomach churned. To them, she was a fairy tale bride. To herself, she was still a substitute. Throughout the evening, she played the role expected of her. She smiled when people praised her, nodded politely when they inquired about their marriage, and stood by his side as though they were united by love rather than signatures on a page. Yet she could not ignore the way his hand lingered lightly at her back, the subtle glances he cast her way when he thought no one was looking. As the night drew on, the orchestra slowed, and the crowd called for the couple's first dance. He extended his hand, and for a moment she hesitated. Then she placed her palm in his, her heart pounding as he guided her to the center of the floor. The music swelled, and they moved together, stiff at first, then gradually loosening, as if the melody carried them closer. She felt the strength in his hold, the steadiness of his steps. His gaze locked onto hers, and suddenly the crowd faded. For the first time, it did not feel like performance. It felt dangerously real. After the last note echoed, applause erupted, and they retreated from the floor. Soon after, the celebration dwindled, the mansion growing quiet as guests departed. When the final car rolled down the driveway, silence settled over the house. He turned to her, his voice lower than usual. "Come with me." Confused, she followed him through the dimly lit halls until they reached his private study. He closed the door, shutting out the rest of the world. She stood by the desk, clutching her hands together, sensing something heavy in the air. He removed his jacket, draping it over the chair, then faced her. His expression was no longer cold, no longer guarded. It was conflicted, torn between duty and something deeper. "There is something you deserve to know," he said quietly. "On the day of the wedding, I knew it was you. I knew you were not your sister." Her breath caught. "What?" "I knew," she ran. "I knew they forced you to take her place. I recognized the difference immediately, but I said nothing." His jaw tightened, his eyes dark with guilt. "If I had refused, my family would have been destroyed by scandal. My company would have collapsed under the weight of it. So I accepted the lie, and in doing so, I trapped you in this marriage." The room spun around her. Anger and disbelief collided inside her chest. "You knew all along? You let me believe I was deceiving you when it was you who deceived me?" His voice rose, raw for the first time. "Do you think I wanted this? Do you think I wanted to chain myself to a woman against her will? I did it because I had no choice, just as you had no choice." Her eyes filled with tears, not just of hurt but of betrayal. "You could have told me. You could have given me the truth." He stepped closer, his face etched with conflict. "And what would the truth have changed? Would it have freed you from the marriage, or would it only have broken you sooner?" Silence pressed down like a weight. She turned away, clutching her sketchbook that she had carried into the room without thinking, holding it like a shield. "You speak of chains," she whispered, her voice shaking. "But what binds us is not duty, it is silence. And I cannot live in silence anymore. Time." He reached for her, but she stepped back, the distance between them sharper than ever. The secret had been revealed, and with it, the fragile trust they had begun to build cracked wide open. The days after the revelation were heavy with silence. She moved through the mansion like a ghost, her sketchbook clutched against her chest, avoiding his gaze whenever their paths crossed. Every word they had spoken replayed in her mind, the confession cutting deeper than any insult. He had known the truth from the beginning. He had let her believe she was the imposter, when in reality he had been the keeper of the secret all along. One morning, her family arrived unannounced. The sister who had fled appeared at the door, draped in luxury as if shame had never touched her. Their mother followed close behind, her face lined with desperate calculation. They did not come with apologies. They came with demands. "You owe us," her mother hissed, gripping her arm. "Your marriage has saved us. Now it is time you repay the debt. Secure us a contract, money, protection. That man is rich enough for all of us. Use your position." Her sister smirked, adding venom to the wound. "You always wanted what was mine. Now you have it. At least make yourself useful." The words sliced her open. She pulled away, her voice shaking with fury. "I never wanted this. I never wanted to take your place. You abandoned everything, and I am the one who has carried the weight of your choices." The confrontation echoed through the halls, and he appeared in the doorway, eyes sharp, jaw clenched. Her mother and sister faltered under his gaze, but not before planting their poison. They spoke of loyalty, of sacrifice, of how easily she could be replaced again if she failed to serve their needs. Later that night, overwhelmed and exhausted, she sat in her room and opened her sketchbook, seeking comfort in the familiar lines of charcoal. But when her tears blurred the pages, the door burst open. Her sister stormed in, snatching the sketchbook from her hands. "You think this makes you special?" she sneered, tearing at the fragile paper. Pages of her drawings, memories, dreams, pieces of her soul scattered to the floor. "Stop!" she cried, lunging forward, but the damage was done. The sketchbook that had been her anchor now lay in shreds at her feet. When he entered moments later, the scene froze. His wife kneeling on the floor, clutching torn fragments, her sister standing with cruel satisfaction. Something in his expression shifted then, colder than steel, angrier than she had ever seen. The fragile bond between them had been fractured, but this act of cruelty lit a fire that neither contract nor silence could contain. He stood frozen for a moment in the doorway, taking in the sight of her on the floor, clutching the torn remains of her sketchbook, while her sister smirked with cruel triumph. Then, without hesitation, he strode across the room, his voice like thunder. "Get out." Her sister blinked in shock, trying to mask her fear with arrogance. "You cannot speak to me that way." "I said get out," he repeated, his tone sharp enough to cut stone. "You walked away from this marriage, from your family, from any right to speak here. You will not harm her again." Her mother, hovering near the doorway, tried to intervene, pleading for compromise, but he silenced her with a glare. "You used her. You broke her. That ends tonight. You will not step foot in this house again." For the first time, her family looked powerless. They retreated under the weight of his command, their protests fading as the heavy doors closed behind them. She remained on the floor, trembling, tears staining her cheeks as she gathered the fragments of her sketchbook. He knelt beside her, his hands surprisingly gentle as he helped collect the torn pages. "I am sorry," he said, his voice low, raw. "I should have protected you sooner. I should have stood between you and them before they ever touched what mattered to you." Her hands shook as she held the ruined pieces. "It was the only thing I had that was mine. Now it is gone. To ache." He hesitated, then reached into his jacket. Slowly, he pulled out a folder she had never seen before. Inside were the sketches she thought she had lost, the ones she had drawn weeks ago, left carelessly in the garden. He had kept them, preserved them, even had them mounted carefully on thick parchment. "You are wrong," he whispered, placing them in her hands. "Nothing of yours is gone. What matters to you matters to me. From this moment on, no one will take from you again. Not your family, not society, not even me." Her breath caught as she looked up at him. His eyes, once cold and unyielding, now burned with something different, something fierce, protective, and undeniable. In that moment, the contract that had bound them as strangers crumbled. What remained was a vow unspoken, but stronger than any legal paper. For the first time, she saw him not as the man who had trapped her in a loveless arrangement, but as the man who was willing to fight for her, even if it meant standing against the world. Dawn spilled across the mansion like a promise of something new. She walked into the dining hall expecting silence, but instead found him waiting. No contracts, no papers, just a man looking at her with the weight of a choice. "I have spoken with the lawyers," he said quietly. "The contract is void. If you stay with me, it will be because you want to, not because you are bound." Her chest tightened. For so long she had believed herself trapped. Now, for the first time, the door was open. "And if I leave?" she whispered. "Then I will let you go," he admitted. But know this, I do not want a contract with you anymore. I want a life. Her eyes burned with tears. She clutched the restored sketches he had saved for her, proof that he saw her as more than a replacement. Slowly, she stepped closer, her voice breaking. Then I choose to stay. Relief and something brighter flickered across his face. He reached for her hand, and she did not pull away. In the days that followed, their home shifted. The long table no longer felt like a battlefield of silence, but a place where laughter echoed. The mansion, once cold, began to breathe. One evening, he placed a simple band on her finger, not heavy with duty, but light with meaning. The first ring was a contract, he said softly. This one is my vow. She pressed her hand over his, tears shining in her eyes. For the first time, they were no longer bound by pretense. They were husband and wife, not by force, not by paper, but by choice.